I am super excited for this next talk because we've talked a lot about insights and insights professionals today, but right now we're about to talk about insights infrastructure. So please, everybody give a massive inside out welcome to Behzod Sirjani.
So good to see all of you. So nice to see so many friends. My name is Behzod. I have incredible SEO, so if you like the talk, very easy to find on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you don't like the talk, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn and Twitter. So would genuinely love to hear from all of you. So I am going to talk about investing in insights infrastructure. And a lot of this came from the fact that we are in this period of change. And it feels like change in a lot of ways is speeding up. I started my career in research over a decade ago, and in some ways the profession looks the same. And in a lot of ways it looks very different. And so for the next 20 or so minutes, it's those differences that I want to talk about. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the differences in my own practice and the practice of the companies I've worked with, because I think it offers us a blueprint for some of the changes that need to be made, and hopefully a provocation for many of you about what could be different in your practice. Amazing. So, like many of you, I started my career as an IC researcher, first at Facebook and then at Slack. And then at Slack, I quickly switched into leading research operations. And for us, what that meant was I spent about half my time making sure anyone who was in research or data science had all the tools and support they needed to do their job. And the other half of my role was making sure that anyone else at Slack who did anything that looked like research or data science was well supported. So I did interview training for our sales team. I rolled out Qualtrics to the entire customer success org. We held office hours and a lot more things. And over the last 4 years, I've functioned a lot more like a personal trainer for product organizations. So in May of 2020, I left Slack and started yet another studio. And the goal was to work with startups basically from their first research project through their first research hire and beyond. And I also started building courses with Reforge and have had the chance to teach over 1,000 people about how to do decision-first research. And currently, I partner with a lot of founders and leaders in product and growth from dozens of organizations, ranging from two-person companies who don't know how to talk to customers at all the way up to logos like the ones that you see here. I've seen research in a lot of different contexts, and so I want to anchor sort of what I've seen across all these organizations in the provocations that I want to share with all of you. What I'm going to end with is some questions that I've been grappling with, that my clients have been grappling with, that I've been grappling with many of you as we've been having these coffee conversations. This is less of me saying I have any answers and more me sharing things that I've seen in hopes that you have also seen similar things and we can kind of push the dialogue forward here. So, almost every research project I've ever done can be summed up by this slide. I used some set of methods to gather some kind of evidence so that my team and I were more confident that some product or set of interventions would drive an outcome. I could probably talk about this sentence for hours, but I want to draw attention to two things. The first is that researchers overwhelmingly focus on the first 6 words in this sentence. We love fighting about methods, about how many people to interview, about the right way to create personas, about whether we should do a segmentation. All of those things are important, right? The craft does matter. But in my experience, we overwhelmingly focus on these 6 words, and this focus in our conversation disproportionately skews it away from the why in our work. We spend a lot of time talking about the what. The why happens to be the rest of the sentence. It's the thing that our partners in product, growth, engineering, sales, leadership, the rest of the company care more about. But the other thing that I really like about this sentence is it helps us grapple with an often uncomfortable truth, that there are too many outcomes and too many products and interventions for us to touch as researchers. We as researchers, research teams, research organizations cannot touch or evaluate everything that we are building. And this has led me to something that I've shared with every company that I work with, and really a truth that underlies a lot of my work, which is the belief that we need to build organizations that learn, not just teams that do. And I think this is a sentiment that's been echoed through a lot of the conversations today. You heard Judd and Alistair share these examples, and many of the speakers have said the same thing. I think that researchers need to become much more comfortable giving away our Legos and stop trying to be oracles, and we need to make it safe for everyone to meaningfully participate in the act of learning, however they want to. Thankfully, we're not the only ones who've experienced this shift, and I think we have a lot to learn from our partners in data science who've gone through a similar transformation. At one point, I, and I imagine many of you, were about this data literate, right? I was like grabbing metrics from whatever I could find, and I was trying to make sense of this. And what this meant was that for many of us, we relied closely on our data science partners to do the heavy lifting of analytics. They were the ones who went over to the well and pulled up that data water and then brought it back to us, and we were able to drink and be hydrated. And then we got tools like Tableau and Amplitude and Grafana and Looker, and the role of the data scientist changed. They were no longer having to go to that well and gather data and bring it to us. Instead, they were responsible for piping and plumbing and the taps and making sure that data flowed everywhere into the company and that it was safe to drink. And plumbing is better than having to go to a well for a bunch of reasons that you don't need me to explain, because many of you probably have modern plumbing, right? You can bathe when you want to, you can hydrate when you want to, you get as much water as you need when you need it, et cetera. And we've seen a lot of similar benefits to organizations when data started flowing. I imagine many of you look at all kinds of data and you're not doing the Bart Simpson, like select all from anything I can find. And this change, in my opinion, isn't just good, it was necessary. Because data science shifted their role so they could continue to make the highest leverage contributions to the company. As tools became more available and people became more data literate, their job was not to go and do the analyses that other people could do. Their job was to make data safe to play with. And I think that doing the highest leverage thing is always good, and we very often ask this question. But the question that I think more of us need to be asking, especially as things are changing, is this one, which is, what is the highest leverage way to contribute to the companies that we are a part of? What are the special skills and strengths that I have to move my organization forward, regardless of what the job description was when I started at this company? Because the world is changing, and it's going to keep changing, and the thing that we need to do is keep checking in with ourselves on, are we helping move things forward and delivering value? And when you ask this question of research, you see a very similar pattern. But instead of going to the well, it's probably this very manual process of talking to customers and gathering feedback. And fortunately or unfortunately, I'm sure this room is split, our partners in product marketing, product management, design, et cetera, customer success are all doing this, and many of them that I'm seeing are doing it reasonably well. And so I'm less interested in fighting over who gets to do this in every situation. I think that the higher leverage thing that we need to be doing is building insights infrastructure. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about playbooks, processes, tools, trainings, templates, the social infrastructure around how do we consume the information that's important to help us make those decisions. What are the rituals that need to exist? And I think that this goes beyond the scope of research operations, because research is often only one of many inputs into how decisions get made at our companies. Our partners in data science and customer success, customer experience, et cetera, all have roles to play in this world. So the question that I struggle with a lot and that I work with my clients on is, how do we embed these best practices as researchers into the way that our organizations operate? When I think about the changes that have happened throughout my career, and especially in the last handful, the only conclusion that I can reach is that we as researchers and insights professionals have not just the opportunity, but the responsibility to focus on helping not just how one team makes one decision, but how every team makes all of their decisions inside organizations. So the highest leverage things that we can be doing is embedding those best practices, which is building infrastructure. So for the rest of the talk, I want to talk about 3 things that I think are changing for us: tools, processes, and people. And I would love to go through a bunch of examples, but I'm going to try to keep this talk short, so you're going to get one of each, and talk about how we can move forward. So let's talk tools. I imagine many of you are familiar with the UX research tools map that User Interviews creates. First off, can we give a shout out to those folks? Because this is thankless labor. If you've been paying attention over the last few years, you know that the map has continued. You know, it used to be small and cute, and then it got bigger and bigger. And somehow this year, there's not just a key, but there's like a sub-key to what is going on here. So there are a massive amount of tools that support us. And all of these tools exist because they find ways to reduce friction in our process. But friction can be meaningful, because without friction, there's no traction. And so the question for us is, how do we use tools to increase efficiency and effectiveness without sending people sliding around? One of the ways, and not just because we're at a conference sponsored by Dovetail, that I think tools can be helpful is around what people know. But the thing that I struggle with is that organizations don't know things. People do. And before all of you start jumping to conclusions and raising your hands and saying, what about research repositories? I'd like to point out that many of you don't have the beautiful library that you think you do, and that instead, most of you have something that looks like the room of requirements. You know that there is gold in here, and there's no fucking way that you are going to be able to find it, right? And we often expect our partners to read like 50 slides to go and find an answer and hope that they came to the same insight. And look, we all know that this is a struggle. But that's changing, right? We saw this incredible demo earlier of Dovetail's Magic Search and some of these other things, where you can not just ask a question of what the company knows, but you can think about how do we bound those searches, right? One of my big issues with repositories for a long time is I feel like it unfairly distributes the burden of finding something to the person who's looking, rather than the person who knows where it is. And it also means that we see lots of cherry picking. We see someone on our team grab a quote of something that sounds great, whether or not the product even looks the same way. And so thankfully, we're seeing tools who are starting to take those things into account and think about how do we start to make it safer for people to look at past information? How do we bound their searches? How do we help make sure that they're pulling from the right customers, the right segments, the right ACV, whatever it may be that we need to use to make those decisions? And it's not just Dovetail. We're seeing tools like Interpret and Monterey that have come out in the last couple of years, which are helping companies harmonize data. They're thinking about what lives in customer success or customer support or data science or research, and how do we bring these together to synthesize and harmonize truths that we're seeing in bigger patterns. And these are just a very small sample of tools that I think are a shift in the way that we practice and are contributing valuable components of insights infrastructure. But these tools also mean a shift. And this was something that Benjamin mentioned earlier, right? They mean that we focus less on reports and more on reporting. I have long believed that we spend way too much time writing reports. Not synthesizing, I think synthesizing is valuable, but the act of making a presentation, the formatting of your fonts, all of this work that doesn't end up actually driving value in helping companies make decisions. And I think that these new tools offer us an opportunity to think about how do we make the source material safer to consume? How do we think about the way that we write things down and tag things and contextualize them so that when people go into these tools, which they are going to do with or without us, they are more able to draw the right conclusions than cherry pick a quote from someone who seems like it fits whatever narrative they need. So if you're a Sweetgreen fan, if you feel like, in a past world, writing a report for someone is like making them a salad, I'm kind of inviting you to think of your work more as like being Sweetgreen. How do you prep the kale, cut the vegetables, give people templates for what they need to come to good and healthy conclusions? Because they're going to have their own preferences on how things need to be reported. And this also brings me to my second point, which are some of the processes and perspectives that I believe need to change as we start to move forward. Now, I'm a bit biased here. I've had the chance to talk to many of you about certain things I believe that may or may not start with the word D. And so when I see people outside of research excited to talk to customers, I get really thrilled. Instead of telling them to stop doing that, I want to harness that energy and ask, how can I better calibrate their eyes and ears so that when they go out into the world and they see things, that adds value to how we as a company think. But to do that well, we all have to be clear what research can and can't do, what data can and can't say. And more importantly, how do we harmonize around different kinds of data so that we can come to robust conclusions? And I think the thing that Benjamin brought up earlier that I love is that reporting and synthesis is now being done at runtime. Instead of consuming a pre-made report, people are going to spin up reports as they need them. And this is happening already if you have a company that uses any of these tools. But the thing that means for us is we have to think about how people work and work together when it comes to making decisions. Because if they're starting to pull their own data and get their own reports, we have to somehow correlate those and collate them to make sense of things. And for me, I think of decision-making in organizations a lot like Wheel of Fortune. And I imagine many of you can look at this and you can probably solve from here. But like Wheel of Fortune, decision-making in organizations involves some sort of puzzle that you need to solve. Different people are able to contribute different letters. You can agree on what letters are missing, and at what point do you feel comfortable moving forward? Do we need almost 100% certainty, or are we okay guessing? What are kind of the risks or the costs here? It also helps you think about what is the plan you need to get those missing letters, right? In some cases, it's running an experiment. In some cases, it might be a customer conversation, playing with a prototype, doing a field study, but you can have that conversation up front because you also can think about the kinds of things that are not going to help you move forward. And I know that dozens of times in my career, and I imagine in many of yours, I've done work to go get a letter that was already on the board. And I think that the other thing that this helps us recognize is we're not the only ones who put letters on the board, right? We are all contributing to how these decisions are made. In some cases, we'd love to feel like we were, a little bit louder in that process. But what this helps with is we can then more clearly recognize where research is an input of the many inputs, and it expands our perspective on what other inputs need to be used in decision making. It also means that we can be better partners to all of our peers who are a part of this process, right? Think about the teams who are voice of customer, customer success, et cetera. When we rolled out Qualtrics to the customer success organization at Slack, we had so many valuable outcomes. It wasn't just that they had better surveys and customers got them, or CSMs received more feedback. It meant that we had a shared source of data that we were all working from, and a sense of the limits of that data. It meant that customer success came to us with better research requests, and we were able to partner with them to sit in on things like QBRs or their monthly reviews. So we won, the company won, and our customers won. The last shift that I want to talk about is how we need to change. The root of the problem, the root of a problem, in my opinion, is that so often we think that researchers are only valuable when we are doing research. We over-index on the fact that we need to be the ones in the room, writing the survey, doing the analysis, right? And there are hopefully lots of ways that you think you are valuable outside of that. But this feels like a very common and prevalent sentiment from people that I talk with. The reality is that we are not just data gatherers, though. We are also data gardeners. We tend to the data in our organizations so that people can more effectively use them and come to better conclusions. It's not just that we understand the difference between a quote from an interview and an open-end in a survey, but how do we think about why quantitative data is valuable? What does CSAT mean? How do we think about success or time on task or anything like that? But I imagine for many of you, you're also teachers. We share best practices with those who are engaging in our craft. I know when I started my career at Facebook, I was working on the ads team, and I knew very little about ads. I had to fly to New York and spend time with some of our large advertisers who were spending millions of dollars on our product. And I was talking to them about how they use the ads API. I didn't know what an ads API was, barely knew what API stood for. And so I had to bring an engineer with me to be in the room to help guide those conversations. So from day one, I was teaching him why we even do interviews. The fact that I was going to ask a lot of questions that probably sounded dumb that we thought we knew the answers to because I needed to hear it from the person I was talking to. And what that meant was that I gained an ally in that process and someone who understood why we were doing the work that we were doing. And they were excited to bring more of their engineering team on future research and listen into our studies. And that practice has continued throughout my career, and I imagine it's similar for many of you. Anytime you're bringing someone in the room, whether they're listening to a session or they're engaging or they even just want to ask a question, right? We have to help them understand why it is that we do what we do. And so we are spending our time teaching. But we're also coaches, right? Many of us are supporting the people who are doing that work, whether those are our friends in customer support who are on calls with customers, and we want to help them understand the power of the words how and why, things like pausing, can you tell me more about that? Giving people feedback and helping them improve. For those of us who work in research operations, we're also architects. Many of us are building these systems for participant recruiting, for insights management, things like data collection or surveys. We are already building these structures, and we need to build more as we move forward. For those of us who've been playing with AI or starting to use LLMs for qualitative data analysis at your company, you're probably also doing a bit of prompt engineering, or you will very soon. You know the kinds of questions to ask of this data the same way that you're writing R scripts for your surveys. And you can share those with other people in your company so that they too can come to the right conclusions with that data rather than paying attention to the wrong signals. One of the things that, again, bringing back to the root of the problem, I feel like there's a lot of people who are spending a lot of energy fighting to stay on the left side of the screen, that they think we need to be the only people in the practice doing the thing. And I disagree. I think if you step back and think about what is it that you bring to companies, what are the strengths and the skills that you have, regardless of what your job title may be, you probably have a much more open and exploratory perspective of what you can do to help move things forward. And again, this comes back to this idea of leverage. What is the highest leverage way that you can contribute? And just like nature, many of us in our companies have seasons. There are times where we need to be the ones doing the work, and sometimes we need to be helping other people do the work. Sometimes we need to be just tending to the garden, and there's not much primary research for us to be doing. But we need to move past the idea that we always have to be operating in one way to be helpful to our company, because it's just not true. So the last thing I want to leave you with is some provocations and those questions that I mentioned in the beginning. But first, I want to talk about how something doesn't quite add up. And I hope that you've felt this as we've gone through today. Because we realize that unfortunately, many organizations have smaller research teams, but they have more people doing research. They have more teams using more tools, gathering more data, but oftentimes less rigor in how they ingest or metabolize the data that they're getting. They feel more customer aware or more customer centric, but they're still mistaking the map for the territory. Researchers are fighting about who gets to talk to customers, but they ignore the new opportunities that are in front of us, right? We have dedicated research ops teams, voice of customer teams, customer advisory boards, and a whole host of other things that help gather and shape important decisions, but we're not always willing to play with them. In a lot of ways, we have a much better tool set and a much shorter distance to data. And when I look at all of this together, I see an opportunity and a need for us to rethink our practice and what our role is. So I want to invite you to think about what are some of those new ways of being, the new modalities, whether it's less reports, more mixed methods, different partnerships, different titles, whatever that may be. So some of the things that I'm grappling with that I want to leave with all of you. When was the last time that we evaluated our own practice? When did you sit down and think about what is it that I am doing here? Who am I doing this for? How do we do what we do? Why do we do this? Are we really here to help our product partners? And have we actually talked to them about what they think research is or how they want to work? Have we spent time researching the organization itself to understand what are some of those rhythms and rituals and how we can more effectively play there? Where are we prioritizing helping one team make one decision, or where is that our mode of focus rather than thinking more holistically about how we can help everyone in the company make better decisions every time that they are doing that? Where are we, I, getting in the way of building an organization that learns? Where am I maybe unfairly gatekeeping? Where am I operating out of fear? Where am I concerned because I feel like I need to be the one doing this or my team needs to be the one doing this? Where actually I could partner with someone or deputize someone or train or empower or support and help them move forward, right? The whole, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You can only go fast for so long before you get tired, right? And I think more of us would benefit from having allies and partners in the work that we're doing. And the last question is really, what are these new roles, these new modalities, and the new opportunities that are available to us today? Because we are in a wildly different world. Benjamin came up on stage earlier, and with a few clicks of a button, did things that took me hours when I started my career. And in some ways, that's kind of scary. The world is very different. And in other ways, that's really exciting, because now, when I get done with an interview, I have an incredible map of the world. I have some of the different things called out and anchor points to where those things came from. So my analysis and my synthesis is probably much faster, because I didn't, back in my day, when I started, I used to record transcripts and then retype them out myself. Watching this is insane. It's surreal. It's a dream, right? And again, those tools are going to be used in good and bad ways, but we're in a moment of rethinking what is possible. And so the thing I want to leave you with is, if this many things have changed, shouldn't we? Thank you.
Awesome stuff. So we do have a few questions here from the chat. So you spoke a lot about research professionals enabling organizations to make better decisions as a whole and how we can go about doing that. So this question is about organizational structures and how you might structure research orgs throughout in the business. So the question is, what do you think of centralized research teams that serve as almost like an agency model versus researchers embedded in teams? And in your experience, what have you seen work?
I've seen every structure work and every structure fail, honestly. And I think that it really comes back to, how does your organization actually make decisions, and how do you think about serving your customers? So if you have a single product organization and you are making centralized decisions, then you want to align your research team to the way that that works. If you have a big organization, if you're a Meta or you're a Google, having a centralized research team probably doesn't make sense, because the speed to helping find insights and make recommendations is so far, right? That distance to decision making is really difficult. I've seen a lot of organizations who play with those, who have like a centralized core team, and then they're working on a new product initiative. So they spit out an embedded researcher, and that person runs far with the team until they get to a stable place, and they feel good about that. Again, I think that a lot of this has to come back to, like, who are the people in our organizations making decisions, and how do we need to support them today? And how do we think about checking in on that every quarter, every half, over time, and continuing to balance to the needs of the organization, right? I think a lot of times we feel like reorgs happen to us, and I wish that sometimes we thought about reorging more proactively, or even leading some of those things. When we realize that parts of the company are or aren't talking, and maybe we're the ones who see some of the cracks in the way that we work.
All right, I wish we had time for more questions, but we are just about to go to another break. Can we give one big round of applause to Behzod? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, amazing work.